Hi guys.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi.
Sorry.
Can you hear? And can I hear you, Abby? Say
yeah,
hi.
yeah, yeah. I'm saying hi.
I can't
Can you
hear
hear me?
you. Interesting.
Lou,
Can
we
you hear me?
yes, Abby, I can hear you. Lou, we can hear you, but we can't see you. And I'm making you all co-hosts as well.
My camera doesn't work. I'm one sec.
Okay.
Because I'm just using a screen that doesn't have a camera, so I'm just opening.
Sure.
But we don't need to use it now. This is audio, right?
Well, it might go out
Actually,
as
we can
audio
see you.
later.
Lou, we
Yeah,
can
we can
see you
now.
actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be good if we can keep our cameras on.
Okay.
Yeah. So Lou, you're in Delhi right now.
You're in Delhi. Oh my God, that's amazing.
And we're all seeing the terrible photos.
Yeah, like the Delhi air pollution must be out of whack right now.
It's out of control. And Abby is in Scotland. Abby, where are you at? Like, where are you sitting? Where have you managed to find a seat?
Oh, I actually got to a cafe because COP is like a little too busy and it's kind of loud and it's just like a too many things. And the food at COP, I must say, is the worst food ever.
Oh,
So
no.
for the last 1 week, what I've been doing is taking something like breakfast bite before going, and then waiting till like 5:30 to
Okay.
go to the Syrian restaurant, which is, I must say, one of the most delicious foods I've eaten. So I stay hungry all day, and then I go to the Syrian restaurant, and then I stuff myself because the food is too good.
Yeah, you posted that Syrian restaurant.
Yeah, and yeah, yesterday it's so funny. Like I went there, and it was Diwali, and there was a Pakistani family. And before even my food came, I was really hungry. So that Pakistani family like literally shared so much food to me. They just like took a small plate and they're like, "Beta, ye kha lo, ye khao, ye khao."
How
So even
sweet.
before my food came, I was actually full.
Wow, how sweet.
Yeah, I know, it's so sweet. So
Abby,
Lou dropped off.
yeah, so Lou, something happened. She's saying laptop has died. So I don't know how she's going to do this. Maybe she can do it on her phone, which will also be okay. Can you
Yeah,
do it on your phone? Okay, let me also ask our office to log in if they can.
they can see my beautiful tired face. I'm waiting for Yashika to come, honestly. That'll be my saving grace.
You're waiting for Yashika to come. What are you doing after this, Abby?
I'm actually going to Scotland for I'm in Scotland, so I'm gonna travel around for a couple of days, 2, 3 days. Then I will be in Edinburgh and I'll be just working, then take a flight to London. And then in London, I just found that flights here are way cheaper than trains.
Oh,
So flights from here to London are like $30, while £30, while train ticket that I bought, I mean, that day was crazy because everybody was coming, was 180.
oh my God, 180 for a train ticket is very bad. But also, yeah, you got stuck with that tree falling and that was so funny.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like you see, it's crazy, like, trying to organize such a big event in such a cold weather. It's like, how do you decide that you want to bring everybody from the planet on this, northern corner? Anyhow, yeah.
It's so miserable. Okay, so all of this. So basically, for your, I will introduce you guys, and then I will kind of raise some of the hot takes that you have been making. Lou has also had some. I mean hot takes in the sense of like interesting opinions that you've had. So I'll raise the things that I saw that you were on your mind that you tweeted.
Yeah.
Then you explain it.
Yeah.
Like standing at COP right now, Lou is entering again. So it's quite gloomy in Bangalore today. I'm not very happy with my light.
Oh, but you look really nice.
Oh, thank you. I just had bath time. That's how it is.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, wow. You look really nice, Lou, as well.
Yes, now you look
perfect.
Yeah, I was like prepared for an audio. So yeah.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, no,
Oh,
we will start a podcast only thing, which we'll start it in Jan 2022. So now we're
Yeah.
just doing webinars to kind of respond to whatever is happening yeah, and from 2022 we'll have like a calendar programming.
That sounds
So,
good.
Yeah.
yeah, so I'll have you
Also,
on
like
something else again.
I've seen is like people really love like videos also. What you can do is like take all of this, record it, and then put audio on the podcast and put video and edit it out and put
Yeah.
that as like a little like video snippet. Yeah.
Yeah, could do that. So let me just introduce you guys. Abby Lou is a journalist. She's been in India for many years, and she used to write for Bloomberg as their environment correspondent. And now she has her own newsletter, which is very popular, and she interviews a lot of major people on that newsletter. It's called Lights On. She's
Wow.
also editing for Third Pole. Yeah, and she's designing some special packages for them. And there was one that she did on health and pollution and environment recently, which as in like she anchored it and it was reported by somebody else. So that's Lou. And Lou Abby is the founder at Blue Sky. She founded it about 3 years ago. And she's been in this climate space for a long time. So I think, like I was explaining, basically the plan of, our plan is to use as much satellite data as possible to look at climate change. So there's a data set on forest and farm fires and emissions from the fires and air quality. There's one data set on that, and then many others that are currently being built. On electrification and a couple of others. I mean, Abby knows better. So yeah, that's the situation.
Yeah, our goal is to essentially look at the entire planet from satellites and do very active environmental monitoring, which is not something which has happened in past. And I mean, just 3 days ago at COP, I think 100 countries have pledged to never do deforestation and to stop deforestation completely. But then if you look at being able to monitor deforestation, there is absolutely no technical infrastructure around that. So you need people like us to build that technical infrastructure beforehand so that we can hold people accountable and be like, hey, you said you're not going to do deforestation, but just look, there's that many trees or that many acres of forest that was like cut or burnt in your country by this company or by that company or whatever. So just sort of a mechanism to really get people accountable.
Yeah.
I think Third Pole has done some reporting with satellite planet kind of imaging, no?
I think we've done that since I joined. We've done something on water. So we collected samples from the ground. So that's what we've been doing. I was definitely looking to do something about the hydrology of the Himalayas, but it hasn't happened yet. So it's one of those stories they keep in the back burner and they stay there. Yeah, hopefully the time will come.
It's a very critical issue though, like the hydrology of Himalaya.
Yeah.
And
yeah, let's get in touch if ever you have any good data on that. I would love to.
We would love to build something. We are actually getting into the water or sort of just larger water resource monitoring in 2022 next year. Right. And with Himalayas, like the irony is that hydroelectric is kind of sold or marketed as clean energy, but it's actually very, very damaging to the overall Himalayan infrastructure, Himalayan like sort of ecological ecosystem. Awesome. Anu, do you want to get the question started?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether we should wait for any more folks because a bunch of people registered, but maybe because today is Diwali, it's not a...
Actually, people are constantly entering. So what we can do is we can get the conversation rolling. And then as people enter, it'll be great if people can also like sort of put questions or comments on the site chat. So we can respond to that like and have it as a more interactive conversation.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Okay, I'll begin. Hi, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this Blue Sky conversation. We're calling it Hot Takes on a Heating Planet because the planet is heating and we have hot takes on it. At least the speakers I have today are extremely intelligent voices in the climate space with lots of researched and articulated views on what's happening. Abhilasha currently is in Scotland attending the COP26, and Lou is in Delhi right now, where she's witnessing and living through this terrific pollution situation we have. So I think they're both well placed geographically also to be speaking on this issue. Let me just read out and introduce Lou and Abhilasha to you. Lou Del Bello is a climate and energy journalist based in Delhi. She writes the newsletter Lights On, which focuses on South Asia's green economy and climate science. Before this, she was an environment correspondent for Bloomberg in Delhi and a freelance science writer at various places, including the BBC, Nature News, and New Scientist. And in 2021, she was the winner of the UK Freelance Writing Awards in the Science and Health category. So that's Lou. And Abhilasha Purwar is joining from COP right now in Glasgow. She is the founder and the CEO of Blue Sky Analytics. She received a Fulbright to study at Yale, where she got a master's in environmental management. Also went to IIT, so she understands tech and environment. And at Blue Sky, she's building the digital twin of the planet and an environmental data stack that Blue Sky hopes will be able to better inform climate policy decisions. My name is Anu. I'm a journalist. I've been in Delhi for many years, and now I'm handling community building at Blue Sky. And this is part of what we call community building activities. So it's been 1 week at COP right now, and the major political leaders have now left Scotland, and who we have right now in Glasgow is various negotiators from various countries, diplomats and negotiators who will be spending the next 10 days or so going into the detail, because the devil is in the details, and they will be in those details regarding various commitments that countries are going to come to, hopefully, regarding the climate. And we've already heard a lot of major headlines in this last 1 week. So I'll read out some of the headlines because I want Abby and Lou to respond to some of this in this conversation. Well, first of all, we had this situation even before COP where we were wanting to know which of the big countries are going to show up and which are not. So the US has shown up. President Biden had, in fact, that's what he said in a press conference. He said the US has shown up, which is a difference in terms of how the US has operated in the last couple of years under their previous president. China, Russia, and Brazil had not sent major political leaders. All these countries, of course, they do have diplomats and negotiators there. Some of the major headlines that have come out this week is number one, over 40 countries pledged at the summit to end their use of coal power. Of course, again, the devil is in a lot of the details regarding how this is actually going to work out, when, who's taking what kind of responsibility. But I'm just going to give you the headlines so that we have a sense of where we are after 1 week. Number two, we had about 105 countries which signed this global methane pledge, where they are committing to reduce their methane emissions 30% by 2030. This includes some of the world's top methane emitters. And number three, in terms of headlines, and I think this one really kind of reached people widely, which is that leaders of about more than 100 countries have also pledged on Tuesday. They pledged that they would end deforestation by 2030. And this is aimed at protecting about 85% of the world's forests. And as far as India is concerned, Prime Minister Modi made an announcement where he said India would achieve its net zero emissions by 2070. There's been quite a lot of debate in India as to what that really means. 2070 is also, well, it's a long time away, but it's also 20 years beyond the UN agreed deadline, which was 2050. I think Lou and Abhilasha will be able to explain a lot of this in much more detail. So I want to just begin by going to both of you. I've been tracking your social media, reading things that you've been writing. Lou has a piece which has been quite widely published, which went up on Lights On, and Abby has been writing as well. So, if I can just begin with you, Lou, if you can, give me some of the things that have been kind of burning you this week. Things that have really kind of irritated you, things that have made you happy. I know that you've written widely about India's climate target on this 2070 target, but some of these other things that I've also been reading on your Twitter, you've been kind of critical about the critics of the 2070 target. So can you just maybe explain your hot take? Where you actually stand. Obviously, this is a nuanced position. So where do you stand?
Yeah, so I was actually quite impressed to hear that India had announced this net zero target, because there had been a lot of chat pre-COP. And the official position of the officials reiterated over and over was like, we're not going to declare net zero by 2050, which many people interpreted as, we're not going to be declaring net zero target full stop. But actually the difference is just, the cutoff date. And I think, based on a lot of studies that were published earlier this year, I think what they're proposing now is the only feasible objective. Like proposing to achieve net zero by 2050 would have been completely unrealistic for a system like India. India is doing really well, but a lot of countries, most countries, especially industrialized countries, they had many years to peak their emission, to develop in an unbridled manner, like their economy being tied to a high carbon development. And even though India will be trying going forward to develop in a more sustainable, less carbon intensive way, it's just simply practically impossible to do it earlier than the second half of the century. So I think it was very reasonable to open with this target, because the achievable target is a very ambitious target, and also provide a series of medium-term targets, which are also very ambitious. Like, they're not going to be easy to achieve. But if the system, the government helps the country get there, then there is a good chance that the 2070 target might be achieved. So it's a lot of ifs and buts. But I also think there are also commentators in COP, especially political journalists from the UK, that have been parachuted there, and they now dishing out their takes without really understanding what what this net zero thing means in practice. And many of them have said, oh, it's 20 years after what the UN has asked, it's too late. But realistically, what the UN has asked is like 2050 at a global level, so it's going to be an average. So you're going to hope that countries will peak and eventually reach net zero targets earlier than 2050. Those countries that have the resources, and they have already, almost completed their development trajectory, so they can do it more easily. Like, it's not going to come at the expense of their people, and leave a bit more time for countries like India and others to really peak their emission and then going down in a way that doesn't damage the people and their economy as well.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying, Lou, you're saying, even while India is such a major emitter in the world right now already, you're saying that we need the sort of permission to be allowed to continue to do this. But you're saying that from a development point of view, or are you making an economic argument, or it's a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. It's just one case in which it's absolutely a combination of climate action and development. So countries like India, they're faced with this challenge of, yes, obviously you have to bring your emissions down, like it's a planetary emergency, so no one is spared in this effort. But at the same time, you have to find a way to develop in a way that is sustainable while meeting your community's needs. Like, you can't accept that people will just stay in poverty because you will have to consume less energy, or you have to spend less money or whatnot, or like build fewer homes. But you have to do it in a way that is sustainable. And this is something that is very interesting for me because it's never been done before. Like, we only have the example in the history of humankind of civilizations that developed and growth by using all the resources that were there in a way that was just very wasteful, but it was fine because the problem of climate change wasn't there, or wasn't really widely recognized. Whereas now we have this new problem, we're faced with this challenge of both, developing our economies, but at the same time, reducing our emissions, for doing this decoupling. And I think India, for its size and for its economic trajectory, is a quite unique example globally. Even China, China is a much bigger economy, and they have this aggressive new target 2060, but they are, they've already had many years to develop at speed, so right. They are at a completely different place than India faces a bigger challenge, and I think this should be recognized. I'm not saying I can be very critical of policies that don't work and are pushed anyway for like political scores and everything, and it happens everywhere. So I'm not just saying because I think the government does everything right, but in this case I feel the policies that I hear coming from COP are really like misinformed.
Okay, so I feel like the initial reaction that everybody had to 2070 was that this is ridiculous. Like it's a long time away. You know, somebody tweeted saying Modi's going to be 120 years old, the prime minister of the country right now, right? He's probably going to be dead. So on a very ethical, emotional level, does this make sense? I think you're making another argument. You're talking about it in terms of poverty and development, that perhaps it does make sense. So Abby, I want to ask you how you feel about this. Are we in a situation where it's a clash and a toss-up between dealing with poverty versus dealing with the environment? I mean, does it have to be seen this way? Is it this way? Is there a way to resolve it? Or do we have to see it as binaries and as opposites? You know, either we continue to be in poverty, but we save the environment, or the other way around.
Okay, so I'm actually going to make a few controversial statements, and I've come to this sort of conclusion, or at least this point of view, after 4 or 5 years of the same, argument, which is, oh, sustainable development. And I personally have gone through the journey of going and living in the US, making a lot of money, buying a lot of stuff, having a lot of clothes and shoes and all of those things, to kind of going to the circle, which is is my grandfather particularly called poor? Why are my grandparents in general, by the global lexicon of economists and development, all of those professionals, why is the target of poor given to them? I spend a lot of time in villages in India, and I'll take example of 2 villages, for instance, like Dadikar. Last year, our company did a retreat there, and there are about 100 households which have really large parcels of land. So each of the houses about, sort of half an acre, with a lot of land and cows and sheep and kids and everything. And I mean, by any category of the economic argument today, they will be qualified as very poor. People who are living on less than $2 a day. And that is, you have about 195 countries here right now. And most of the narrative, most of the companies, most of the nonprofits, most of the writers, most of the journalists are essentially coming out from the Western world, which is US and America, which is, Europe and US, which is about 1 billion of the global population, which is the major billion which does most amount of emissions. While as soon as you start to look at Southeast Asia and India, Pakistan, most of the African subcontinent, there are about 6 billion people who live in these places who cause hardly any emissions. And what we are doing is this narrative that those 6 billion people have to replicate a lifestyle of 1 billion people who are causing most of the emissions. And then they have to do this in some sustainable manner. While also, I would say, thinking about some of the contextuals of timelines, my grandfather's house is a 185-year-old house. That is almost half the history of United States of America. So in India, in Southeast Asia, in a lot of communities in Africa, people have lived for 4s and 5s of thousands of years. People will continue to live. So it's a little unpopular opinion, but must we all develop in the same way of development, which has been sort of made as this normal or the standard? Are there other ways of development? And if you look at some of those other ways of development, then definitely I would say things like healthcare become a primary, aspect. Access to internet and access to information is a very primary aspect. And India has successfully executed access to internet at a very, very cheap cost, at a very, very cheap carbon footprint to most of its population. So must we go through this journey where we have lots and lots of cars and lots of electricity in the houses? Do we have to really replicate the model that is being narrated and is being propagated by the standard? And if we start to think about a different kind of development, which I think is something which has gone into minds of everybody thanks to COVID, because in the COVID pandemic, it sort of put a halt on the global humdrum. It was I want you all to look back. And as a company, for instance, we went completely remote. And if you just calculate the amount of carbon emissions that we are saving by 20 people not commuting to work, the amount of real estate costs that we are saving, the amount of rent that everybody in the company is saving by not having to live in a very primary urban real estate, you look at all of those savings and it hasn't really reduced our productivity at all. I would say on the counter, it has increased our productivity as a company. You could be living in a small village, paying a rent of 5,000 rupees, pocketing all of the rest of your money, all of the savings, and living a really high quality life, while also being part of the tech sort of revolution. If you look at Blue Sky, it is one of the most high tech, deep tech, AI, satellite data companies on the planet. So when all of this is possible, I would say that India could potentially even look at a much more imaginative infrastructure, much more imaginative pathway of growing and developing, which does not have to look the way of the carbon emissions intensity or the energy intensity or the material intensity that we have seen with the other developmental pathways. And the most primary thing there is India's current economic GDP also has 70% contribution from services and technology. India is a big tech hub. We have one of the highest amounts of education in the engineering and mathematics domain. So we keep on continuing with that. We can actually go to $5 trillion, $7 trillion worth of economy by going through more innovation in the spaces of, oops, am I here?
Yes, I can see and hear you. Yeah.
More innovation in these spaces for, like, technology development, SaaS, AI, data. You have all of those. Like, a Google is $1 trillion company, Facebook is $1 trillion company. We could have those as the ideology or as the pathways of development, rather than coal mines or coal power plants or bridges and railways and ports and manufacturing. We could have some smart manufacturing for sure. I'm not going to deny that it's not important, but it's a very important time to reimagine what development looks for each country. It's not just for India, but for each of the 50 countries, 50 something countries in African subcontinent, entire sort of Middle East, entire Latin America, and kind of almost not always defer to the, the developmental models that are given to us.
Yeah, I think what I saw you tweet is that that you were saying that I think third world countries, quote unquote third world countries, should be called low carbon lifestyle countries, and first world countries could be called high carbon lifestyle countries. What I'm understanding of what you're saying is that this pathway to 2050 or 2030 or 2070 need not be a mimicry of the pathways that we have already seen in the West. I feel like I want to understand more what that might look like, because of course, as a developing country and as someone who lives in a developing country, I want everything, including the consumption, the access to consumption that I see, counterparts have. But there still is a burden on somebody like me to live this like low carbon lifestyle or sustainable lifestyle. And I just wondering, Lou, you've been part of these debates for a very long time. Is there a way, this pathway that we're talking about, and like you were also saying, there's a short term, medium term, and long term situation that we're looking at. 2070 is definitely a long term situation. But practically, what can this pathway look like? So are we saying, or are you saying that this 2070 pathway is a pathway where we should be allowed, or developing countries should be allowed to develop in a way that is some sort of a mimicry of the pathways we've already seen? Or is there a drastically different way to imagine this?
You asking me?
Yes, Lou, yes.
No, I think Abby made a really good point. Obviously, if we think about developing in a low carbon way, we can't, imagine that the type of lifestyle, wasteful lifestyle, would be exactly the same, because it won't be. But it won't be for anyone in I think in developing and developed world. Like, things will have to change, and I think eventually things like diet will change, and the type of products that we buy and then we learn to use will change as well. And if we think about, I can give you an example of Delhi, because we are right there at the moment, and the air is just completely unbreathable, and it's the same situation over and over. Every year comes Diwali, the crackers, but in reality, it's not just Diwali, right? It's the winter season. And I think good part of that is, for example, you have lots of cars that are polluting. They're really bad for people. They're really bad for children, in particular, because children are smaller, and the smoke belches in their face. This will cause long-term health problems to people living in cities, and so on. So I think, for example, one thing that could be developed in the future without really compromising on a good quality of life could be incentivizing cycling in big cities, or electrifying public transport, which will not compel people to spend a lot of money on their individual private electric cars, but will help people travel around in a less carbon intensive way, in a cleaner way. So these kind of changes, I think, obviously will mean that our lifestyle will change, but will probably be better for us. Or, like, for example, you have this problem in the US where people eat a lot of meat, and it's really bad for you. There are problems with obesity, with like really bad diets, because people will eat 5 sausages at lunch and 2 steaks at dinner. And a lot of people, if you tell them, give up meat for a day, a week, or 2 days a week, they'd be like, but what am I going to eat? And it's not necessarily that they don't want to, it's just that's the diet you've been used to. So, and in that case, it's not just a matter of what you have available to you, but also something that you could change. It will make your life better. It wouldn't be necessarily a sacrifice. It's not that you have to eat bad food. You just add more variety to your diet, and it's better for you. It's better for the planet. So I think definitely there will need to be a way of rethinking the idea of development. But countries like India, I think they really can lead the way, because it's a billion, like more than a billion and a half people put in this situation of facing this challenge, and they can, like, state governments and like central government and communities down to small communities on the ground that can really rethink the way you can develop in a more sustainable way, and look after yourself in terms of health, in terms of your favorite lifestyle, your well-being. That doesn't necessarily have to be a wasteful lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. I just as a tease, I want to raise a hot take. It's not mine, it's not original, but I've been seeing it going around, which is that everybody thinks that carrying your own metal straw and your own like plastic cup to Starbucks is going to save the environment. And I'm just I feel like like today I ordered a whole bunch of stuff on Zomato, and like everything came in a different single-use plastic, which is absolutely all going to be thrown. So I have a friend over, and we were just discussing. She was asking me, "Do you feel guilty? You're going to go on a webinar now and talk about this?" I was like, "I should feel guilty, but I don't really know." So I'm just wondering, with what you were saying, like our diet choices. I mean, this isn't something that you have to respond to, but in general, I'm wondering, how do we think of the micro and the macro? How do we think of the individual and the system? And how much responsibility should I take as an individual? Is this my problem? Or is this the problem of the Bidens and the Borises and the Modis and the, is it, who do we place accountability on? Who do we kind of put on the mat? Let me ask you about that. Who do you feel like we should be putting on the mat? How much should we take on ourselves? The guys who are here on this session right now, and how much should we place on the others?
Let me actually button on that one a little and give some numbers on it. Okay. So I did this calculation on like the oil companies. The downstream of oil companies is the companies which make plastic. Downstream of that is the companies which are retailers like your Walmarts and Targets and Amazons. Downstream of it is the brands essentially. So your Unilevers and Procter and Gamble's and the guys who make the pipe and all of those. And then you have like your distributors like Zomatos and all. Zomatos and all are very tiny in the comparison of the Dows and DuPonts and Targets and Amazons. Essentially, Amazon is $1 trillion. Zomato is barely like 2 billion. So you just do like Amazon is 1,000 times bigger than that. And once you look at that, it's coming out to be about $3 to $5 trillion worth of the supply chain, which is around plastic. And there is a lot of incentive for that supply chain for you to buy more and more straws, for there to be more and more startups and more smaller companies, which are like $1 million company. Because in the larger scheme of thing, like a company like Blue Sky, in the scheme of $1 trillion economy, is like a small individual. And the system is incentivized to have more companies which do produce more of plastic. I'll give you another number, which is in the Western world, in the US and UK, almost 50% of clothes that are bought by people and are in their wardrobes go from being manufactured in Bangladesh or Vietnam to being transported all the way to like H&M's and Zara's or whatever other stores in the US or UK, and then being shown and being displayed in like prime real estate in like main like streets and the malls, to being bought to the landfills without ever being worn, or by worn like 1 or 2 times. That is the consumption rate. So you can almost think that you can not manufacture all of those 50% of clothing items. And if you don't manufacture them, fashion accounts for 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. You can potentially reduce like 2 to 3% by stopping manufacturing or stopping stuff which is not used by anyone in the first place. So it's not so much about like individual consumption. It's more about that we are just kind of manufacturing stuff which nobody essentially uses. Another number I'll throw is that America's per capita consumption of meat is 127 kilogram per capita. In the last 5 to 7 years, we've had a lot of movement of people becoming vegan and vegetarian, and yet that number hasn't really gone down. That number hasn't gone from like 127 to like 120. In contrast, Pakistan and Iran, which are very like meat consuming countries, like, you have kebabs everywhere and so on and so forth. India's meat consumption is 4 kilograms per capita. Pakistan is, I think, at 11 and Iran is at 13. So one country, which is also very non-vegetarian and eats a lot of meat, is only at 11, while the other is at 127. which begs the question, who is eating 2 abhilashas per year? Because I'm about 50 kilos, so 57. So somebody is eating 127. They're eating two meat completely. And then you start to think of that actually Americans are not eating that much meat. The meat is just being produced. Then it is going through Walmart where it's really, really cheap to their fridges, and then it's being thrown because nobody is actually eating all of this. And it is in the, it's in the benefit of a lot of companies like Cargill and Monsanto's and all the large meat producing companies like these organizations, which for them to sell you more and more meat and for you to like buy that meat, whether you eat that meat or not, is actually not at all the concern of that particular organization. And once you start to look at these numbers, you see that a lot of our economic activity is not to fulfill any need of any person, because you have clothes which are going from manufacturing to landfill without being worn. You have food which is going from like being grown to the landfill without being eaten. And this is like food which can stay in the fridge for a long time. So you can actually have that fatty again. And which kind of starts to beg you a question on what is this economic humdrum about? And this is where sort of our role as an individual comes, because we are an economic actor at the end of the day. We as a consumer, or as an entrepreneur, as a taxpayer, as a political entity, as a writer, as a philosopher, as a thinker, we are an economic actor. And if we sort of continue in the same humdrum direction and not challenge all of these inefficiencies in the system, which can really reduce like 5 to 10% of GHG emissions without compromising on anyone's lifestyle, anyone's meat consumptions, anyone's fashion requirements. Third and very important point, the sea trawling, the deep sea trawling for the fishes and everything. It's done by less than like 50 companies in total, which employs like less than 10% of the global like fishing like people who are engaged in the fishing activities. Because a lot of time the narrative is like, oh, if we stop fishing, then what about the employment and livelihood of all of these people? Deep sea trawling, which is responsible for most amount of carbon emissions, most amount of the damage to the seafloor, and just like really, really high amount of like damage, in contrast to the, fisherman in Ghana getting on his boat with his 10 buddies and going and doing line fishing and then selling that fish in the market. That fishing is not doing any significant carbon emissions. And that is actually feeding most of the population. Deep sea trawling takes the fish and it throws 50 to 60% of the fish because it's not ideal for them. You can tomorrow ban deep sea trawling, tomorrow. Biden's and Trump's and, Putin's and I don't know, Japanese minister, an Indian minister, they can tomorrow ban deep sea trawling and everyone can still be fishing and eating fish. So you can really stop with a lot of these major inefficiencies. But I think what is very key in the system is most of those major inefficiencies, which is very industrialized agriculture, industrialized production of like your clothing items, industrialized fishing, also is a very, very large dollar value, wherever that dollar value is coming from, right? That dollar value is very closely tied to the political systems. And that is why nobody has this sort of, I would say, courage to stop that dollar value, to sort of be like, okay, this dollar value has to go to zero tomorrow, because it's actually not fulfilling anyone's needs. And once you start to go into that direction, you can really go for a very sustainable development, fulfilling everyone's need, giving Anu high quality food without a lot of plastic in the packaging, while stopping, this sort of incessant production of stuff that nobody needs.
Got it. Lou, if in case you want to comment on that, and I mean, I'm very conscious of time, so we'll keep this to a tight 45 minutes. So I'll just have one more question for both of you. But in case, Lou, you have, something you want to talk about this individual versus the system issue.
I agree with this. I think, it's easy to feel guilty about, consuming plastic and, consuming goods that are carbon intensive and everything, while maybe being very conscious about the problem of climate change. But I also feel we live in a system where it's really hard to escape these kind of consumption patterns. Like if you want to order your food and it comes with lots of plastic, what do you do? Like sometimes, and so like when I choose my takeout occasionally, I will look for a restaurant that will serve stuff not in plastic, and there's almost nothing. Like it's very common here, you always whatever you order, it will come with lots of like little chutney in plastic, and you will have 6 or 7 items of plastic for each meal. And for me, this is a perfect example of, there's only that much you can do as an individual, and at the end of the day, even if you do it as a like individual, like you're just a single entity, What we need to do is to rectify these production systems that aren't quite right, and they just wasteful, and could be corrected very easily without really having an impact on our quality of life. So I think for me, the best thing you can do is really vote in people that will speak out for you against the situation, and implement good policies that can correct the problem.
Got it. Okay. And I just want to ask you both, of course, if there's anybody who has questions or comments to make to anybody here, that'll be great. Please feel free to drop it in the box. But let me just ask you both to wrap up. We've seen week one and we have some more time to go. I know both of you will be tracking it closely. Lou, you'll continue to write about it, and Abby will be in and around Scotland. Are you feeling hopeful, or are you guys, this is not your first rodeo. You've been to COP before, you've tracked COP. If you haven't attended, you've tracked it. Are you feeling hopeful? Are you feeling excited? Do you feel like something is different about this time, or is it same old, same old? What do you think? Lou, what do you think?
I feel, you have to take COP for what it is. These are slow processes, and there's a lot of chit chat, and you have to see what happens in the end, and you can only assess the progress over many years. So obviously, I don't expect anything to change in the way things are run this way. But I think this year, we're really reaping what we started with the Paris Agreement. When the Paris Agreement was signed, I was there in Paris, and I remember thinking, 2 degrees is already a crazy target, not going to happen. 1.5 is just something they said literally just because the small island states complained towards the end of the negotiation. And so they just added it there as a target. And then just yesterday, we were saying that if all countries that pledged net zero were to be put together, the world will be on track for 1.8. So getting closer to 1.5 rather than exceeding massively the 2 degree target. Obviously, the fact that we are there, that we're crunching this number, doesn't mean we're very close to it to happen, because a lot of countries that pledge decide tick box net zero targets, or they're just too ambitious, or anything can happen between now and 2050 or 2070. But this is the nature of the process, and you increase ambition every 5 years, you increase ambition every year, and eventually, even if you don't achieve your super ambitious targets, you're able to catch up. And so the progress is there. And yeah, so that's, I think, is the optimistic way to see the COP iterations without being unrealistic. Because obviously, if you expect anything sensational to happen on the ground, that's not how it works.
Yeah, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, I think, if you're expecting something that's unrealistic. I think that's fair. And I think generally there's a lot of noise and a lot of high energy around COP, and that tends to set the expectations very high. But the brass tacks of how the world actually works is a lot more complicated, a lot more difficult. So, okay, got it. Thanks, Lou. And Abby, just, so that we can round up, where are you at? You've been to COP before. Where are you at? Are we closer, like Lou is saying? Are we closer to Paris 2015, or are we further away? What do you feel?
I think there is a good hope, in the sense which is earlier COP used to be a major sort of engagement of just the governments and the nonprofit sector. And for the first time, you have a lot of tech people, you have a lot of startups, you have a lot of corporates and companies, you have a lot of like hydrogen and battery storage and sort of innovation and engineering of all kinds. And there's a whole like sort of booth and right now the COP is divided in a blue zone and a green zone. And the green zone is completely like corporate and startups and all the technologies. And within the blue zone also, there's almost like, I would say 30% is sort of the players of economy rather than the players of the quality. On the other side though, the nature or the mood between the science pavilions, like so the science and the ice and the water pavilions, or the scientist folks, versus the sort of the first world nations and even the third world nations. So for instance, if you go to like the booth of Congo or booth of the sort of small island nations, the kind of mood and the pessimism is very different. I would say the science booths are very, very depressing and very sad, because they look at the numbers and the numbers are just not pleasant at all. The third world countries, the Congos and the small island nation, they have this, I would say, a very weird sort of helplessness, which is like, we are just part of this like global economic humdrum, and what can we really do? And there is a lot of optimism in the Sweden and the UK and the Nordic countries and the US. And I just don't know. I hope that optimism can translate into a lot of capital flow. And by capital, I mean like both like, the financial capital and the human capital, and that capital flow across, the capital flow, not just to the sort of the Americas and Nordic countries and the Swedens, but the capital flow to small island nations and Indias and Africas. If that capital flow does happen in the right time, and a lot of technological innovation can happen. The best part of tech is that it has a very exponentially sort of rising nature. So even if we see with our own company, we have gone sort of like, a degree every year. We've gone from 1 to 10 to 100. So if that kind of technological innovation can happen in the space of hydrogen, in the space of, just general like monitoring and like technology or like software technology infrastructure, I would say there is a lot of good hope. I am actually very excited about the next COP because it's going to be in Egypt. And I would say there's likelihood of being a much more equitable representation of people and a likelihood of being a much more equitable narrative in that COP. So hopefully looking forward to that. And Blue Sky would try to make a bigger dent in that COP especially.
Okay, got it. We will wrap up now, but I just want to take this one question that's come in, and there's somebody else who's also sent a message to me on plastic. But let me take this question that's come out publicly. Abby, maybe you can take it. This person's asking,
how can geospatial be leveraged for indigenous environmental protection and landscape protection in the rural areas or even urban areas, basically places where environmental atrocities are hidden? So one of the things is that if it is at a very, very low resolution, like let's say less than 1 kilometer, less than 500 meters, then it's going to be pretty challenging to notice. But large environmental sort of pollution or activities like deforestation, sort of large like emissions from coal power plants or heat pollution or water pollution, they have pretty large spatial footprint. And the best part is that it's actually a very, very cheap technology by the larger scheme of things. So if I give an example, India used to do environmental monitoring with 250 monitors prior to Blue Sky, and now we have 3.3 million data points. So you really see how we go from 250 data points to 3.3 million data points. So more and more satellite data environmental monitoring that can happen in the next 5 years. We would have very good resolution for places which typically don't have like that kind of capacity to put so many sensors and so many like, different kinds of like machinery and people on the ground. I have a hope, I'll give an example of the telecom infrastructure. The US and Europe essentially had the telephones where you used to pick up and do the calls, and then they migrated to sort of like, the internet and the mobile cellulars, while India or Africa went straight to the cellular and never had to put those telephone lines. I have a hope that is exactly what can happen in the scope of environmental monitoring, where we might be able to deliver really good quality data and services to most of the parts of the world with very little cost, while not following the model of like the IoT sensors or that many IoT sensors. So I think environmental monitoring is something which will be absolutely revolutionized in the next 5 years.
Got it. Thank you so much. And thanks for that question. It'll be great if we can chat later also to the person who asked that question. Okay, I will wrap this up. That's 45 minutes. I think there's a lot of noise on my end. I have an alarm going off. Sorry about that. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Abby and Lou, for being so geographically well placed and also insightful with what you had to offer. And we will catch you at the next COP, where we will still be discussing issues like this, and catch everybody else as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.